All right, so we got this Hollow Knight lore from Mossbag. It's about 1 hour and 17 minutes about the mostly complete lore of Hollow Knights. We're gonna finally check it out after finally getting through Path of Pain. Here we go.
The game's navigation system requires the player to work for their map, forcing them to make a stronger mental image of the world in their head.
I just use compass a lot of the time.
And Ari Gibson's artwork lend to this as well, creating an atmosphere that the player won't want to leave. But there's one aspect of Hollow Knight that keeps people like me coming back: the world building. Through its world building, Hollow Knight turns Hallownest into a living kingdom. Nothing feels like it was put into the game randomly. There's a reason for it all.
True.
These past 3 years have seen an insane amount of research by the Hollow Knight community to make sense of Team Cherry's
How they eat
world.
ass.
We've even made it to the point where people are looking at the in-game signs to try and decipher the Hallownest logographic language. In this video, I hope to give you a long and detailed look into the world of Hollow Knight. And while I am a seasoned Hollow Knight lore expert, I cannot confirm that every musing or theory presented in this video is completely correct. I highly recommend checking out the lore section of the Hollow Knight wiki if you want a more neutral explanation of Hollow Knight's lore. But if you're too lazy to read, then I suggest you sit back, order some Domino's pizza, or just grab a block of cheese from the fridge and enjoy the mostly complete lore of Hollow Knight. It's a simple fact of life that every human worships.
I just realized that statue's radiance.
Technology, ideologies,
Wow.
or in rare cases, God. As it turns out, the bugs in Hallownest pretty much operate in the same way. From the mosskin
I
born
just
from the
realized
dream of
that.
a giant slug, to the emo kids of the ancient civilization who literally worship
Emo
darkness,
kids.
there is no shortage of things to worship in the world of Hollow Knight. Our story begins with a creature very much worthy of worship. A creature born from the carcass of a worm. At the time Hollow Knight occurs, it is suggested there are no worms left in the world. Another more mysterious
I hope there's secret
property
ones
of
in
worms
Silk
was that
Song.
they had some kind of prescience or foresight. Basically, they could see the future to some capacity.
Kind of like, oh, we
It
thought
isn't
they were
clear how
gone, but they're
effective this
not.
ability was. Considering how the entire race went extinct, this foresight ability must have been pretty shit. It is explained that this worm traveled across the distant mountains and wastelands beyond Hallownest.
I know worm lore.
Once it arrived in Hallownest, the worm died. Except not really. Inside the maw of the carcass sits a pale broken egg, out of which hatched a new form of worm, a being of meager shell. This form of the worm is usually referred to as the Pale King, and he's the character basically responsible for everything that happens in Hollow Knight. His body was said to shine with a radiant visage that harmed those who looked upon him. The ultimate goal of the Pale King seemed to be in line with that of
So
other
the king
worms,
came out of the worm's
a line
ass
from the
crack?
cryptic Mr. Mushroom
That's
reads,
what I'm getting here.
"Worms pull bugs into their thrall, till ages pass and kingdoms fall." In other words, it's just in their nature. The Pale King emerged from the corpse of his former self and began to build his eternal kingdom, Hallownest. There's this one slight problem. There's like people already living there. The area that would eventually become Hallownest was already filled with mantises,
That's a cool looking map.
bees, moths, spiders, mushrooms,
Why
and
is
bush
Spider-Man?
cosplayers.
What the?
Each of these groups were
What?
already operating with their own cultures and societies, and each group had a different interaction with the Pale King. One of the more receptive groups to the arrival of the Pale King were the mushrooms of the fungal wastes. Ultimately, the mushrooms wearily accepted the Pale King's
I remember
rule,
finding this.
viewing his foresight as a shield to the dangers of the future. Another group living in the fungal wastes is the Mantis tribe. The Mantises have a rich cultural history reaching
God,
back
the
to long
Mantis
before
enemies
the
at
birth
first.
of
Oh,
Hallownest.
I
The
hated them.
Mantises are a proud tribe, believing in the importance of proving one's physical strength. The Mantises are fiercely territorial, but will show respect to those who display great power.
Why Garfield?
These Fight Club enthusiasts were led by
Why?
4 powerful Mantis lords, who I guess just kind of sat around waiting for outsiders to challenge them. In exchange for their independence from Hallownest, the Mantis tribe kept the beasts of Deepnest from invading Hallownest. Not sure why they didn't just go out the other exits from Deepnest, but whatever. We know that the spiders of Deepnest had a monarchy because why not? Those are always good, right? Also within Deepnest are a separate group of spiders that immigrated to Deepnest at some point in the past. This group was known as the Weavers, and they established their own culture and history within Deepnest. One thing we know for sure about Deepnest is that they really didn't want anything to do with Hallownest. Now, as far as we can tell, the mushrooms, mantises, and spiders of Deepnest didn't worship any higher beings. There is this giant mushroom corpse in the fungal core, but I don't think this is a higher being. I mean, who the hell would want to worship a fat-ass mushroom? Fat-ass slugs? Now that's dope. The land we know as Greenpath was created by the higher being known as Un. Un used her great mind to dream the vegetation of Greenpath into the once barren caverns. Un's followers, the Mosskin, were also born out of Un's dream. At one point, Greenpath stretched into both modern-day Queen's Garden and possibly Fog Canyon. Greenpath's citizens showed themselves to be a fairly developed society, and they even had their own line of defense, with Moss Knights showing proficiency in combat, using nails and shells as weapons.
So that's why it's the wake of
the law of
Un?
Un
Yeah.
continued to remain in effect even after the Pale King arrived. But it seems like they allowed the king to establish a road through their lands, leading travelers to the heart of Hallownest. Next, we have the bees. And while there is no lore on how these bees can turn into fucking drills, or how they can ignore all known laws of aviation,
Yeah,
we do know how they reacted
I
to
don't
the
know,
Pale
man.
King. These bugs decided to seal their hive off from the rest of the world, with only patrol bees being able to enter and exit the hive. And finally we have
They're
the
so
moth
annoying
tribe.
too.
In-game, the only moth settlement is in the resting grounds. But the tribe might have also inhabited the Crystal Peak at one point. The moth race is described as being a rather pacifist group, with few ever choosing to take up a weapon. During the Pale King's reign, the moth race delved amongst dreams and the dead, displaying the importance of remembering those who have passed, as well as learning how to shape dreams themselves. The moth tribe was born from a higher being known as the Radiance.
It's so
The Radiance
obvious
is
it's
described
Radiance
as being
now.
a light in which the moth tribe
Crazy.
basked. Another important aspect about the Radiance is her ties to dreams and a substance known as essence. Essence are the remains of wishes and dreams, and are represented in-game by these dream catcher particle effects. Essence can take the form of whispering roots, as well as dream ghosts, both of which are memories taking root in the world. The Radiance appears to be a creature made of essence, but she isn't the only higher being to give off essence. Un has green particles, the Pale King has gray particles, and this sexy character named Grim gives off
I love
fiery
Grim.
red particles. However, the Radiance appears to be the main god when it comes to dreams. Getting back to the Moth tribe, it is their interaction with the Pale King that we need to discuss. Basically, the Moths turned their backs on the Radiance completely, in order to worship the new light that had appeared, the Pale King's light. Moths are assholes in this game too. With her tribe forsaking her, the Radiance became a forgotten memory, and a thing that's definitely not going to come up again later.
No,
And
not at
so
all.
the Pale King's new kingdom was established.
Definitely not.
We're going to have to read some poetry. In worlds beyond they speak your name with reverence and regret. For none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch you taught, we changed. Base instincts were redeemed. A world you gave to bug and beast as they had never dreamed. This is from a poem titled Elegy for Hallownest. Much of the land outside of Hallownest appears to be a wasteland, where bugs survive off of instinct, without the burden of mind. Hallownest somehow taught these bugs and tamed their savagery. Basically, the Pale King changed the instincts of his subjects and granted them higher thought. Let's look at two different characters. Boone and Tuck. These adorable panda bug things
I remember
give
this
us
guy.
a clear display of Hallownest's effect. While both appear to be the same species of bug, Boone is dumb as a sack of rocks.
I never
struggling to
met the
string
other
together
one though.
words, while Tuck speaks fairly clearly.
I met Tuck.
The main difference between these two characters is that while Boone lives outside of Hallownest, Tuck lives beneath the city's capital. Basically, it appears as though Hallownest is a literal holy ground that raises the intelligence of those who dwell within. The king's motivation for all this appears to have been his desire to be worshipped. The citizens of Hallownest believe that the Pale King created the world and everything in it. Shrines to the king can be found scattered throughout the kingdom, and king's idols were created and distributed to followers of the king. Despite the worship, the Pale King often kept himself hidden from his subjects. The Pale King's White Palace was also built underneath the city, separating him from his subjects even more so. However, the Pale King didn't rule alone. There was another higher being in the
there's
mix,
this
a
character.
being known as the White Lady.
Yeah.
The White Lady is a weird brute-like being that can be found in the modern-day Queen's Gardens. She is encased in a strange cocoon, and we know very little about her. One thing we do know is that she likes to breed. Like, a lot. The White Lady would often retreat to the Queen's Gardens, an area of land once controlled by the Mosskin. How exactly she walked around and actually went places is a lore question too deep for even my expertise.
Yeah, it
The
beats
White Lady
me.
is also known as a pale being, along with the Pale King. What exactly are pale beings? Well, we don't know for sure, but they seem to stand out even amongst higher beings, as being even more powerful. The king also ordered the construction of the tramways, because literally no one is safe from the threat of automation. A tram was built between the Forgotten Crossroads and the Resting Grounds. A
The
second
trams
tram
were
was
so
built
nice.
from the kingdom's edge across the ancient basin over to Deep Nest. And then a third tram was started in Deep Nest and attempted to go further into Deep Nest. Not sure how useful that would have been to the bugs of Hallownest, but whatever. The Pale King's a smart guy. I'm not gonna question him. But anyway, the Pale King's
So, like,
super
they
smart
tried
plan
to
build
put
a
one there.
tram in Deep Nest ended up getting a few of his tram workers killed.
Oh.
The bugs of Deep Nest rejected the Pale King's attempt to build a tram in their territory, further cementing the poor relations shared between the two groups. Aside from convenient fast travel, regular pathways were also used to cart goods around the kingdom. From this was born probably one of the most important groups in Hallownest, and perhaps even all of fiction. An elusive guild of bugs, simply known as the Menderbugs, took to maintaining the various
So
signs
cute.
scattered throughout Hallownest. Another example of the Pale King's expanding infrastructure is the Crystal Peak. These crystals were considered valuable
Crystal
to the
Peak,
bugs
awful,
of
man.
Hallownest, resulting in large-scale mining efforts. We don't actually see the crystals used anywhere else in Hallownest, but they are said to contain a sort of energy. The crystals are also said to sing, if you listen very carefully.
Oh my god.
In terms of military,
I literally got
Hallownest's first line
rickrolled
of
in a
defense
reaction
appeared to be a group simply known as the
to
Five
war.
Great Knights. The members of this esteemed coalition were Ogrim, Hagamol, Zamir, Drya, and Isma. Ogrim
I'm
is the
jumping
knight
off
we know
and
the
don't
most
blame you.
about, since he is one of the few knights still alive during the events of the game. Ogrim expressed a great amount of loyalty towards the king. Hagamol was known for his sense of humor and his soft-spoken voice. Mysterious Zamir arrived in
Big as
Hallownest
fuck.
from a serene land, bringing with her a collection of delicate flowers. At some point, she
I
also
don't
got into
care
a
about that
relationship with
person.
a mantis, but not just any mantis, a daughter of one of the mantis lords.
Screw their flowers,
So yeah,
man.
It seems like these great knights were slaying in more ways than one.
I don't want to do that.
All we really know about Drya is that she was fierce, caring, and wise. As for Isma, she was described as being kind, but there's no information on where she's from or what her powers were.
Seems cool.
The Five Great
Weird?
Knights played an important role in the Champion's
Man.
Call,
Harsh.
the Knotted Grove, and the Battle of the Black Worm. Carved out of the corpse of an ancient bug, an area called the Colosseum of Fools was constructed. The sole purpose for fighting in the Colosseum appeared to be simply for glory, with a mysterious figure known as the Lord
Yeah.
Fool overseeing the combat. We don't know when the Colosseum was constructed or if the Pale King was involved, but one of his servants, the Pale Lurker,
Yeah, that
became a
thing.
champion in the Colosseum, perhaps indicating the Pale King's approval. And finally, there was the Royal Waterways, where the fecal excrement of the kingdom was washed out into the fungal wastes. This area saw the rise of a species of parasite-like
my-
creatures called the flukes.
I
The
hate them.
flukes spawned from the fluke marm, a giant monster with cavities in which tinier flukes live. There really isn't too much lore involved with the flukes, but I do need
I
to
hate
point out
the
that
flukes.
the fluke marm is canonically a MILF. Like, that's not even debatable.
Oh,
The sky is blue, 2
Oh.
plus 2 equals 4,
I see.
and we all want to fuck this thing. And so this was the kingdom
That's
of Hallownest
crazy.
at its height.
That's
Hallownest was
crazy.
a vast kingdom connected by a network
Smash-
of stagways
don't
and
say
train
smash.
stations. The bugs of Hallownest mourned their
Oh
dead
my
on resting
God.
grounds, engaged in commerce using Geo, the de facto currency of the region, and a thriving capital located in the middle of the kingdom. The Pale King had succeeded in crafting a full-blown society, but we all know there are pitfalls to living in a society.
Joker.
As a suspiciously knowledgeable hunter
Whoa.
points out in his journal, the Pale King had created a population of weak and pathetic creatures.
Don't blame me.
This is even
What is
more
going
obvious
on in
with the
chat?
east wing of the capital. These greedy members of Hallownest's high society became complete cowards. Bugs living in Hallownest Prime looked quite different than the instinctive simpletons they once were. Their savagery had been replaced with intelligence, and through that intellect, they gave the Pale King the devotion and service he desired. Resting at the threshold of Hallownest is a strange lore tablet,
Jesus
proclaiming
Christ.
Hallownest to be the last and only civilization. It calls Halonest an eternal kingdom. This appears to have been the Pale King's goal, and that was the Pale King's ultimate folly. To think that he could succeed where so many others had failed before. One sect of these ancient bugs didn't worship a god like the Pale King or any lord, but instead a dark and mysterious substance known as the Void. This ancient caste once also tried to lay claim to the entire land of Halonest. In his quest to conquer all of Halonest, the Pale King had made an enemy that was about to be remembered.
Oh.
I mentioned earlier that the Moth tribe entirely forgot about the Radiance in order to worship the Pale King, but that isn't quite true. Memories of her still lingered, and hushed whispers of faith kept the Radiance alive. At the summit of the Crystal Peak, a location known as Halonest Crown, a strange collection of glyphs can be found. Joining these glyphs is a statue of the Radiance, presiding over the kingdom.
Piano version of the Radiance
the
game?
Summit is the sole standing shrine left to the Radiance. This was built in order to keep the memory of the Radiance alive. The Radiance's light began to appear in the dreams of Halonest citizens.
Hopes and dreams?
This light manifested itself in an infection that ravaged through the kingdom's tunnels. Those infected would fall into a deep sleep and awaken with broken minds. Many infected bugs lost
I
their
hated
wills
those ones.
and began
They're like
attacking bugs
kamikaze
that
ones.
weren't
Oh my
infected.
god.
The infection also twisted the bodies of its hosts, causing them to bloat and occasionally
Oh yeah, that
develop
was
orange
weird.
cysts on their bodies. For many victims, they were reverted back to their basic instincts, carrying out the duties they once fulfilled in life, but now as mindless slaves. Those caught up in the infection were linked into the Radiance's hive mind, allowing her to control their bodies if needed. As the
That's
infection
crazy.
spread across Halonest,
That's what it.
many groups looked to solutions to fight off the Radiance's light. The gates to the City of Tears were closed in an attempt to keep the infection from reaching the city. The stagways were also shut down at some point, and many of the stags eventually died out. The scholars of the Soul Sanctum decided to harness the power of Soul in an attempt to fight the infection. This resulted in the deaths of hundreds of bugs, whose souls were sucked out and injected into the bodies of the scholars. The scholars' leader, the Soul Master, was driven mad by the sheer power of Soul, and his entire sect failed to avoid infection. At least they took as many innocent people down with them as they could. The Mantis tribe, showing a stronger will than the common bug, were able to stave off the infection. However, one of the 4 Mantis lords turned against his sisters. He and his followers took the infection willingly,
I've heard about
as
this.
it gave them more strength and courage. The Trade Lord's daughter ended up dying at some point. This is the same Mantis that was in a relationship with Zamir, one of the 5 Great Knights. But the Mantises rejected their union because of Zamir's outsideness. With the 5 Great Knights completely useless to fight against the infection, the Pale King devised his own scheme. A scheme involving a strange substance known as Void.
Yeah, no. How powerful was the Hollow Knight to fight it off and try to kill himself? That's kind of insane. Like what?
At the bottom of the ancient basin was the entrance to a pit known as the Abyss.
The Abyss is crazy.
Was a lake composed of void. The Pale King realized that this void could be given form. The Pale King devised a workshop in his palace, where he placed void in armor shells imbued with soul, creating servants known as King's Molds and Wing Molds. These void creatures were somehow imprinted with the desire of the Pale King, so that they would serve him. It isn't clear when the Pale King started making these creatures.
Oh, okay.
There is evidence to imply that even common bugs were aware of King's Molds. But the point is, the Pale King turned to the Void in order to create another creature, one that he believed could contain the Radiance and her infection. He tried to create a pure vessel. The Radiance's infection needs its host to have a will and a mind in order to enslave it. The Pale King believed that by harnessing the Void inside a pure vessel, he would be able to stop the infection and keep Halonest lasting eternal. But his
broken vessel was one of the attempts, probably.
Was incredibly cruel. This is where the White Lady and her King Kong-sized libido come into play. These 2 higher beings engaged in a union of some kind, resulting in the creation of several eggs that were dropped down into the abyss. This act resulted in the creation of the vessels. The vessels are not technically considered to be alive. They are shells created from the Pale King and White Lady that have been filled with the void.
I know they
Thousands
bred
of
that
vessels
much.
were created during this process.
Absolute freaks. Absolute freaks. Let's see. Like you get the knight became like a god because of absorbing the void, but the Hollow Knight was just fighting it off a god. Yeah, that's pretty insane. Awesome character. But yeah, they had to be like crazy strong to be able to do that.
One was chosen as the pure vessel. This particular vessel, chosen by the Pale King, was deemed the Hollow Knight. The big question surrounding this moment is, why was the Hollow Knight chosen over any other vessel? One common theory is that the Pale King took these vessels back to the White Palace and evaluated them using his giant collection of buzzsaws. This theory is probably the least likely explanation. It
Screw those saws, man. I don't want to see another saw again.
Which is quite the mystery, I'll admit, but doesn't really mesh with the vessels very well. So this means that the Pale King probably made his decision without taking any of the vessels out of the abyss. So how did the Pale King make his evaluation? I think the best explanation comes from a theory I originally heard from a user named Golden Flower Fan. Basically, the vessels were hatched down at the bottom of the abyss, and the first one to make it to the top was chosen by the Pale King. In memory of this event, we see vessels falling from above back down into the pit of the abyss. Perhaps these vessels weren't being cast down into the abyss, but fell while trying to escape out of it. The lore tablet outside the abyss appears to support this theory. It reads, "Our pure vessel has ascended. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of its creation. We shall enter that place no longer." This tablet was likely written right after the Hollow Knight was chosen. The tablet proclaims that the pure vessel has ascended, or in other words, climbed out of the abyss. And while cut content should never be—
And he probably didn't want anyone else to find out what happened. Crazy.
considered canon, I would just like to point out that an earlier version of this tablet, found in the game's code, was even more explicit about this. It read, "From below, our pure vessel has ascended." What if the Hollow Knight wasn't any different from the other vessels? All the vessels were made in the exact same way after all. The idea that the Hollow Knight was somehow more hollow than the other vessels comes from the fact that there were so many vessels created in the first place. If they only needed one, then why create so goddamn many? Well, these are bugs we're talking about, so it would make sense that multiple offspring would come from one egg, and it might have been a precaution to produce multiple vessels in hopes that at least one would be able to successfully—
Yeah, I think it's more than multiple. It's a bit more.
Ultimately, the exact details aren't super important, but I do find it interesting how many different interpretations can be pulled from this part of the lore.
Yeah, they made literal mountains of them. Look, you can literally see it on the border of the game. They covered the majority of the shot here. Insane. Pale King is the first guy who has aura for being a freaky fraud.
There's also a lighthouse that was built on top of a naturally formed spire, its light shining down on an ocean of abyss below. Inside was one of the Pale King's royal retainers, who was left in charge of keeping the lighthouse turned on.
Oh,
so
yeah.
This brave soul was willingly sealed in a dark and dangerous tomb for the rest of his life, just so he could not pull a lever. Well, at least he was living with purpose. The Hollow Knight was raised and trained to prime form, causing it to grow several times its original size. We don't know exactly why this happened.
That's why he's so
but I guess
tall
the Hollow
now.
Knight is just a grower and not a shower. We know that the Hollow Knight was trained to use a nail, but why was this even necessary? One possible explanation is that the Hollow Knight needed to protect itself in case an intruder tried to kill it. You know, like the player. Additional seals were needed in order to protect the Hollow Knight's physical body while the Radiance was trapped inside of it. To achieve this, the Pale King sought the help of 3 particular bugs,
The Dreamers,
who would later be known as the Dreamers. Hidden on some of Lurian's lore tablets are images of jars, the same jars that can be found stockpiled in the Tower of Love. This building sits on the outskirts of the city, and is the setting of one of the most bizarre bosses in the game,
Collector.
The Collector is a void construct that
We're
appears
just
to
on
have
the
been made from
same
the
wavelength
mold
on
used
saying
to
the
create
bosses'
the
names.
king's molds. But the Collector is unique because, well,
Good grief, he's naked!
The Collector stayed in the Tower of Love with a noble bug who likely owned the establishment. However, the Collector somehow became obsessed with grubs, creating a map to keep track of grubs it captured in jars, as well as keeping a strange shrine displaying a grub in the style of the Vitruvian Man. Despite being locked up in the tower, the Collector is still spotted by the Hunter at some point. which either means this only happened recently, or the hunter has been farting around in Hallownest for a long ass time, perhaps trying to protect them from the spread of the infection. But we don't know where the collector's obsession with grubs originated.
Yeah, the hunter
While
looks
Larian
so
does
cool.
seem connected to all of this, we don't know how involved he was with this operation, or what its end goal exactly was. Motomon the teacher lived in the teacher's archives, a library built atop a lake of acid in the Fog Canyon. The lower half of her body consists of tentacles, making her a popular subject for the thriving Hollow Knight R34. The archives and the Fog Canyon as a whole are also filled with
God
these strange
damn it, bro.
Metroid knockoffs. These creatures are likely related to Motomon in some way. Several terminals in the teacher's archive go into detail about the Pale King's plan to defeat the Radiants, indicating that Motomon had intimate knowledge of what she was taking part in. Finally, the
That's
Pale
crazy.
King sought the help of
She's
Hera the
also a
Beast,
freak.
the Queen of Deep Nest.
Oh my god.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, relations between Hallownest and Deep Nest were kinda not great. Unlike the other two dreamers, Hera needed to be convinced in order to help the Pale King. Hera would eventually agree to become a dreamer in exchange for a child, and the two engaged in a dalliance, which is a fancy way of saying they totally boned. The White Lady was okay with this arrangement. In fact, she might have been watching from the closet.
Jesus.
The motive behind Hera's
What a
request is
freak.
never elaborated on, but it appears as though the King of Deep Nest
my
was dead
God.
at this point. Hera was a common bug, so perhaps she desired the Pale King's pale seed so that her child could be of high birth.
Oh my
The bargain
god.
between Hera and the Pale King resulted in the birth of Hornet. She became known as the gendered child, because unlike the Pale King's other children, Hornet was not hollowed out by the abyss.
Yeah, I didn't know Hollow
At the
Knight was
base
this
of
freaky,
Lirian's
man.
Spire, the Watcher Knights guarded access to their master's body. Motomon's body was protected by a giant jellyfish named Umu.
I hated
On
this
top
boss.
of this, Motomon entrusted her servant Quirrell
He was cool,
with
though.
a mask which would be
I
required
like him a lot.
to break an additional seal she had placed over herself. As for Hera, we're not really sure what protected her, since
Yeah.
it is never actually seen in-game. Hidden away in the Weaver's Den is an incomplete seal of binding, woven from silk. This design prominently features the Hollow Knight's head, and can be found in the White Palace, as well as blocking the exit during the Hollow Knight fight.
Oh.
Silk spools created by the Weavers can be found in the Stag Station in Deep Nest, as well as the Stag Station next to the White Palace.
Yeah, no, why is like 30% of the lore right now just breeding? Like the Pale King was an absolute fucking freak. The White Lady also a fucking freak. Probably the worst one here. Jesus Christ, man. Okay, let's continue.
The Pale King's workshop. We know that the Weavers were closely tied to Hera and Hornet, so their actions might have been a part of the deal between the Pale King and Hera. Once the Hollow Knight was ready, the Radiance was somehow channeled into the vessel, which was then placed inside of a giant black egg located in the Forgotten Crossroads. The Hollow Knight was chained up, and the entrance to the black egg was locked behind a powerful seal created by the three dreamers. But this is the part of the story where things get a little bit hazy. By the time these statues were constructed, citizens had taken to writing on parchment woven from spider silk, which was all destroyed when water started pouring down onto the city.
Makes sense.
We don't know how long the Hollow Knight was able to completely contain the infection. Bugs from Dirtmouth used to go to the Temple of the Black Egg to pray.
Still feel bad for the Hollow Knight, though.
But after a while, they stopped going, perhaps indicating that the infection was beginning
Literally
to leak out.
born to hold.
The infectious
vessel
air continued to seep
whole
through
time.
Hallownest for years, eventually even reaching the deepest parts of the kingdom. As it turns out, the Pale King's pure vessel wasn't quite so pure after all. Hidden away in the White Palace is a memory showing the Hollow Knight and the Pale King sharing a moment.
Guess you can say Hollow Knight was one in a
Hollow Knight might have
million.
developed a
Yep.
parental bond to the Pale King. And who could blame it? The Pale King is a pretty great
I got Chad is the like 2-second
Dad
cutscene I got
after
after being past the
Hidden away
pain.
in the fungal core, the corpse of a giant mushroom lies dormant. Its final thoughts were, "Pale worm, what good to see a demise unavoidable?" This could imply that the Pale King always knew that his kingdom was doomed. All he could do was delay the inevitable. When it became clear that the Hollow Knight was not able to contain the Radiance, the Pale King resorted to his final plan. He fucked off, hiding himself, his White Palace, and his Pale Court in the Dream World. At this point, all of the furniture in
boy.
the palace was covered under white sheets, similar to how people in the real world cover their furniture while away on long trips. The palace was also completely covered with thorns and buzzsaws, similar to how people in the real world cover their houses with thorns and buzzsaws.
Yeah, I do that all the
The
time.
Pale King would eventually pass away while sitting on his throne in the White Palace. The throne room is incredibly dark compared to the rest of the palace, and the particle effects and ambient track in
That's
this
true, it
room
is
are
really dark
identical
there.
to that of the Abyss. All of the king's molds surrounding the Pale King are dead.
Yeah.
The ancient basin itself also has become stained with the presence of void. Remember that bug that was sealed away in the Abyss to make sure the lighthouse wasn't turned off? The lighthouse was turned off. I guess that whole living with purpose thing is a crock of shit after all. It seems as though the Sea of Void itself actually convinced this bug to betray his king and turn off the lighthouse. Now I know what you're thinking. Exactly how conscious is the Void? Does it host a podcast? Well, according to this chosen
That last
statue
part?
ripoff, the Void is powerful, but not unified. So while it can thrash around at things that come near it, or call out in unison to turn off a light, it's not a single conscious being. Getting back to the Pale King, one could argue that the Void might have played a role in his ultimate demise, but we have to remember that there isn't enough evidence to know for sure. As an expert lawyer and a good friend of mine, Johnny Cochran,
The guy like washing away. Poor guy, his intrusive thoughts won that time. Like they just won. Poor guy. But yeah, the Pale King did all that knowing it won't do shit. Like he's just freaky. That's what we're getting from the lore. Like all the characters are just freaky, and they love giving birth apparently.
the White Lady also diminished her power, possibly as a way to keep herself hidden from unwanted visitors. Outside her
Fair.
cocoon, Dryia stood guard, protecting her queen from the violent traitor mantises. Dryia is eventually killed off by these bugs, which is actually pretty pathetic if you think about it. I mean, we're talking like the Netgear WPN824N N150 wireless router pathetic. Speaking of great knights dying pathetically, let's move on to Hagamol. Hagamol's armor shell was stolen by a maggot. Now, maggots were generally looked down upon and forced to do menial labor.
These
They were
guys.
incredibly weak, and basically deserved all of the discrimination they got. He stole Hagamol's shell so that he could defend his downtrodden brothers. His actions weren't motivated by the infection, but instead was the result of how hierarchical caste systems will always lead to revolution from the working class, and that true freedom can only be achieved blah blah blah, capitalism is bad, subscribe to my Patreon. Ogrim moved to the
W
Royal
plug.
Waterways. Ogrim acted as the defender of the pipeways,
Crazy.
as well as Isma's Grove. A section of the Royal Waterways became filled with acid, and in the middle of it all rests Isma's corpse, which has been overcome by plant life. Isma is likely the one responsible for this acid blight, but we have no idea what happened to her. Hornet's
wish I
whereabouts
did.
during this time are fairly mysterious. We know that she departed Deep Nest and didn't return until the events of
Wish
the
I knew
game.
more about Isma.
At some point, she took to guarding Halnest from intruding warriors, as well as the cast-off shell in the Kingdom's Edge. The Mosskin were waiting for Un's call, which would bring them back into the dream they were originally born from. But for some reason, Un's strength deteriorated. We don't know why this happened exactly. Some Mosskin believe that Un went into hiding, but it appears as though Un is, in fact, calling to her children. But many of the Mosskin are unable to hear her call. Instead, many Mosskin seem to have taken the Radiance's infection into their leaves, which might explain why Greenpath became overgrown with vegetation despite Un's deteriorating powers. Mossy vagabonds even openly chose to forsake Un and worship the Radiance. Another tribe to be screwed over by the Radiance is the Hive, but it appears as though this had little effect on their civilization. The Radiance's hive mind was already familiar to the bees, since the Hive probably operated under something similar already. So in other words, the Hive probably made out the best in this whole situation. Let's turn our
Seems
attention
like it.
back to— well, the Moth tribe didn't fare too well actually, as pretty much the entire tribe died out. The only known survivor is the Seer. Despite the loss of her tribe, the Seer continued to tend to the graves in the resting grounds, while also waiting the arrival of the Wielder, a mysterious being that her tribe has dreamt of for a while. The Colosseum of Fools continued to thrive. The fools inside the Colosseum were infected, but still seemed to have maintained control over themselves. It seems possible that these bugs took in the infection willingly,
Hey, I found
similar
that
to
secret,
the Traitor Lord and his followers.
Spring.
This would have given them an edge in combat, similar to using steroids, but without the whole shrinking testicles thing. When the Hollow Knight was originally chosen, the door to the Abyss was sealed, trapping the discarded vessels within. But apparently, some vessels didn't get the memo. Vessel corpses can be found littered throughout the kingdom. There's one in the Ancient Basin, one in Greenpath, and several trapped in Nosk's lair in Deep Nest. Another vessel
Yeah,
that
that's
escaped from the
freaky.
Abyss is the player character, the Knight. The exact details on how the vessels escaped the Abyss is unclear. There are indications that they might have slipped into Deep Nest through some old passageway, given void influences in part of the area, and all the corpses found in Nosk's
Yeah,
lair.
my god, man.
At some point, all entrances to Hallownest were closed off, with the old well-endured mouth being the only way to sneak back in. In the Howling Cliffs rests the corpse of a member of the Grim Troop. The task of this bug appears to have been to seek out Hallownest, so that the troop might be summoned to the kingdom in the future. The Grim Troop are basically a group of bugs
I
that
love the
serve a
Grim
higher
Troop.
being known as the Nightmare Heart. The troop keeps the heart alive by feeding on the nightmares of fallen kingdoms. This process also involves sacrificing the troop master to his own child because, hey, look at this cool ass boss battle. Another important group that traveled to Hallownest are the God Seekers. These bugs left their home in the Land of Storms, seeking out a new god to worship. The God Seekers looked to gods to save them from their own silent mind. The God Seekers constructed devices called God Tuners, which helped them seek out new gods. Through this device, they were able to detect the lingering power of the Pale King and find their way to Hallownest. The God Seeker was forced into hibernation. She was encased in a strange sarcophagus-like cocoon, which was itself chained up with a lock. The Pale King was rebelling against nature, trying to keep his work standing indefinitely. The stasis over Hallownest held for an age. How long is that exactly? Well, we have no idea. At some point, the radiance erupted out of the Hollow Knight, cracking its shell and releasing a loud and powerful roar. The amount of infection leaking out of the Hollow Knight became even greater. The many corpses that lined the roads and cities of the kingdom sprang to life with the amplified power of the infection. This strengthened infection prompted the departure of the Weavers back to their old home. Now this old home might actually be Farloom, the kingdom in which Hollow Knight Silksong takes place. But the amount of knowledge we have about Silksong right now is pathetic, so I'm not saying that's confirmed or anything. At around the same time Quirrell arrives in Hallownest, we also see the arrival of the player character, who is commonly referred to as the Knight. The Knight was one of the lucky vessels that was able to make its way out of the Abyss. Somehow the Knight ended up venturing beyond Hallownest and into the wilds beyond. It's implied that the Knight was called to Hallownest by either the sealed Hollow Knight or the Radiants within. Regardless, once the Knight shows up and yeets itself off this cliff, the actual game of Hollow Knight finally begins. Hallownest is full of NPCs and bosses, each with their own
I've never
stories
seen
to
that
tell.
character.
But to be honest, I don't think we need to go through all of them, since their stories are relatively straightforward. For example, let's look at the Brooding Moloch. So
I
why
never
is the
found
Brooding
this
Moloch
boss
brooding?
normally.
Because all
Crazy.
its friends are dead. And there you go. That's the lore for the Brooding Moloch. Also, it's the only character in the game with a visible asshole.
Gee,
Now, did you really need
why
me
do you have to
explain that
point it
you?
out?
Probably not. So instead,
why did you have to point it out? Now I'm gonna see that every single time I see someone play this game.
the Knight is eventually noticed by Hornet, who lures it deep into Greenpath. There, Hornet attempts to kill the Knight, claiming that she knows what it would try to do. After the fight, Hornet can be found in the City of Tears, next
Yep.
to the statue of the Hollow Knight. Hornet mentions that the Knight has gained a resilience, due to the time it spent in the void beyond Hallownest. At this moment, Hornet sees the Knight as a possible replacement for the Hollow Knight. Basically, the Knight could break the seals that keep the Hollow Knight locked away, defeat the Hollow Knight, and contain the infection itself. It's at this point that I should mention that Hollow Knight actually has 5 different endings, because of course it would. I'm going to be explaining each of these endings in this video, as they each give us a different glimpse into the mechanics of Hollow Knight's world. Now, to get the easiest ending to Hollow Knight, Hornet's instructions
First
to go
one's
to the
probably one of my
Kingdom's Edge
favorites.
can be ignored completely. If the Knight stumbles upon the resting grounds, the 3 dreamers will appear and cast the Knight into the dream realm. There, Seer will come to the Knight's rescue and grant it the Dream Nail, a special blade that can tear the veil between the real world and the dream world. Inside the egg, the Knight finds the Hollow Knight chained up.
I mean, it's like the
silently
way
watching
everyone
over.
beats the game the first time.
Once the chains are broken, the Hollow Knight screams with that familiar Radiance roar and pursues the Knight. Once defeated, the Hollow Knight
Pretty
begins
sad.
to spew infection all over the place. The Knight can then focus the infection into itself. This results in the first ending of the game, called Hollow Knight. New chains and bindings appear out of fuck if I know, and contain the Knight, and a new seal is placed over the entrance to the Black Egg. Now there is one giant question looming over this ending. Can the Knight actually contain the infection indefinitely, or will the Radiant still manage to break free one day? Before we answer this question,
It probably would
let's look
break
at some
free
of the
one
other
day again.
events that can transpire while playing the game. If the player chooses to go to Kingdom's Edge, Hornet will challenge the Knight one last time as a final test of strength.
Yeah, that's a hard
After
fight,
her
man.
defeat, Hornet allows the Knight to access the cast-off shell, where the Pale King was originally hatched. With the King's brand, the Knight can now open the entrance to the Abyss and discover the place of its birth. When leaving the Abyss, the Knight can encounter Hornet again, where for the first time, Hornet suggests that there are actually two outcomes the Knight can enact. She tells the Knight that it can either prolong Hallownest stasis, or face the heart of the Kingdom's infection. After visiting the Abyss and obtaining the Shade Cloak, the Knight is capable of reaching the White Lady, hidden away in the Queen's gardens. The White Lady tells the Knight that she has been awaiting a vessel to accept a gift, that gift being one half of a charm called the King Soul. The White Lady goes on to explain that she can feel the weakening of the Hollow Knight within her roots. She tells the Knight that it is free of the blemishes that made the Hollow Knight a flawed vessel. It is implied that the Knight truly is a pure vessel, capable of containing the Radiant successfully. Despite the White Lady's words, we have a number of instances where the characters and item descriptions mention that the Knight has a will, and maybe even a mind. But from the Pale King's dialogue when describing the Hollow Knight, it is stated that a pure vessel has no mind or will. So is the White Lady wrong? Or maybe even lying? Her eyes have been clouded by time, and she can be tricked into thinking that Ogrim is in the room when the Knight is wearing the Defender's Crest charm. She also thinks that Dryad is still alive, which,
yeah, I got some bad news for
the
you.
White Lady is just senile. My problem with that theory is that the White Lady states that the vessels stand out to her clearly in a misted world, and I think the game leaves room open for other interpretations.
What are they doing?
Of course, the White Lady's gift is useless without the other half of the King's Soul. In order to reach it, however, the Knight must travel to the White Palace, locked inside the body of a King's Mold. In order to bypass the seal, the Knight must use a fully awakened Dream Nail. It can do this by bringing 1800 essence to the Seer.
Yeah, that was a
allowing her to
grind.
sharpen the weapon's blade. If the Knight does this, the Seer remarks that the Knight truly is the wielder that her tribe has been dreaming of. But it seems like they believe the wielder would wash away the crimes the Moth tribe committed by turning their backs on the Radiants. The Seer seems to know that the Knight
You always
may
thought
kill
that
the
White Knight
Radiants,
to Dream
and
Nail
she
had a
seems
long ass
accepting of
beard.
it, ready for her and her tribe to disappear and be forgotten forever. With the awoken Dream Nail in hand, the Knight can travel to the Pale King's refuge and locate the other half of the King's Soul charm. The King's Soul provides a never-ending supply of soul, making it almost useful if it weren't for the insanely high cost of the charm, and the painfully slow rate at which it increases, and the fact that the charm will get replaced in about 5 minutes after you get it.
Yeah.
The King's Soul charm itself symbolizes the union between two higher beings. The Knight now gains access to an area in the Abyss called the Birthplace. In this massive pile of vessel shells, the Knight can find a giant egg. Dream nailing the egg allows the Knight to access its own memory when it was cast down into the Abyss. From viewing that memory, the King's Soul charm is replaced with the Void Heart charm. The recollection of this event allows the Knight to come to terms with the void inside itself. Once the Knight has the Void Heart, the Shades in the Abyss no longer attack it, and that strange creature
I really
gives
like
the Knight
that
the
touch
Shade
too.
Cloak calls it the Lord of Shades. It is with this charm that 2 additional endings become unlocked. Hornet will now be standing outside of the Black Egg, offering to help the Knight should the opportunity arrive. Midway through the fight with the Hollow Knight, Hornet rushes into battle, subduing the Hollow Knight and piercing its shell. It's at this point that the Knight is given the perfect opportunity to enter into the mind of its sibling, fighting the source of the infection head on, and finally putting an end to the Radiance's tyranny. Or it can just stand there and let Hornet get knocked unconscious. If the Knight finishes off the Hollow Knight as usual, the sealed
I've
sibling
actually
ending
done this
occurs.
one before, believe it or not.
Basically, it's the same as the Hollow Knight ending, but now Hornet is in the room too, and her face appears on the door of the Black Egg.
Yeah.
It's not clear what exactly this means for Hallownest. Generally, people consider this to be one of the worst endings, but it's worth pointing out that Team Cherry doesn't support any one ending as being the true ending. Each ending is canonical in its own right, and honestly, this ending isn't the worst. At least the Knight and Hornet will get to spend some quality time together. If the Knight does dream
Yeah, I
of the Hollow
guess.
Knight, it will be taken to an
There's
arena
one
where it
way
can
to
finally
do
fight
that.
the Radiance head on. But the Knight isn't alone, as the other shades from the Abyss will appear in order to help corner the Radiance.
Yeah, that was cool.
Eventually, the Radiance gets trapped in the tendrils of the Void. The Black Egg then appears to turn to shadows and the Void seeps down into the ground. Hornet awakens to find the Knight's broken shell lying on the floor. We get one final shot of the shades in the Abyss going to rest, and the game is over. This ending is called the Dream No More ending. The Radiance is gone, and Hallownest is finally free from her infection. When the Hollow Knight was initially chosen to become the pure vessel, the Abyss was sealed up, and the rest of the vessels were left to rot away. But somehow, vessels ended up outside of the Abyss, and then one of those vessels was used to replace the Hollow Knight. Exactly how much of this operation was planned, if at all? The White Lady was waiting for a vessel. Did she have any communication with Hornet? Hornet was guarding the King's Brand, the only way for a vessel to enter the Abyss. How did she know it was necessary to guard the King's Brand from weaker vessels? I'm not going to provide any good answers to these questions, because God forbid I answer anything in this entire video. But I do want to point out that no plans to actually produce the Dream No More ending are explicitly stated in-game. So we can only speculate as to whether or not the White Lady or Hornet, or maybe even the Pale King, knew that they could defeat the Radiance by creating a Lord of Shades, like the Knight. The last two endings that were added in the Godmaster update almost feel out of place. The Godseekers basically hijack everything to the point where you don't even have to enter the Temple of the Black Egg to beat the game. That's like beating Mario Bros without ever seeing Bowser. But on the other hand, the Godmaster endings basically reinforce that Hallownest does not exist in a vacuum. If the Knight finds the Godseeker in the Junk Pit, it will be able to enter her mind and refight all the bosses in the game. This is part of the Godseeker's ritual. They basically attune to the resonance of gods through ritual combat. This allows them to ascend their minds higher, and eventually, through the use of godly focus, achieve communication with the gods sleeping in Hallownest's heart. As the Knight makes it further and further through the four pantheons, the Godseekers get closer and closer to making contact with the Radiance, locked away inside the Hollow Knight. At the end of the fourth pantheon, the Radiance makes herself aware in this strange reunion cutscene between the vessels. But she isn't the only one to make an appearance. The Void itself appears to go on the attack, rising up to meet the Radiance's call. It's at this point that the final challenge, the Pantheon of Hallownest, becomes available. Finally, the stage is set. After roughly 40 minutes of intense agony and tedious boss battles, the Knight has finally reached the ultimate enemy, responsible for the destruction of Hallownest. But first, let's check in on our old pal Menderbug.
My God.
As it turns out, he's still alive when the Knight arrives in Hallownest, and he's still fulfilling his duty after all this time.
Good job,
Let's
man.
take one last look at his diary.
My lovely diary. Someone's gone and broke my favorite sign. Right there at the top of the crossroads.
No!
Keeps happening too. But you know, I just can't get mad about it. I should be thanking them, really. More chances to fix that beautiful, complex sign.
Good go.
Unfortunately, the only way to ever read the Menderbug's diary is to kill him in cold blood. I'm not sure why Team Cherry thought this was necessary, but the general consensus on Reddit is that they are bloodthirsty warmongers, so it checks out. But at least Menderbug's last moments will be spent fixing one of his favorite signs in the Forgotten Crossroads. The alternate fight between the Knight and the Radiance plays out differently than in the
platforms are
vanilla
cool.
ending. This time around, the Knight is not accompanied by any shades. Instead, after defeating the Radiance, the Knight seems to transform into this monstrosity. Now this creature goes by many names. The God of Gods, the Lord Shade, the Devourer, the Void Entity. But I don't really like any of those, so I will just call him Bill. Bill proceeds to completely annihilate the Radiance in spectacular fashion. We are then treated to the Embrace the Void ending. Bill comes back down from the sky, dropping into the rest of Godhome. The Godseeker starts to get pulled into Bill by Void tendrils. We then cut to the Godseeker in the Junk Pit.
Damn.
Void starts leaking out of her eyes, and it appears as though Bill is making an escape back into the real world, which is probably a bad thing? Finally, we see Hornet standing outside of the Black Egg as the infection begins to disappear from nearby vines. Hornet hears footsteps coming from inside the Black Egg as the Hollow Knight reveals itself to her and the two prepare for combat. So from this cutscene, we can see that the Radiance's death in Godhome actually did kill her for real, meaning that the infection over Hallownest is now gone. This means the seals inside of the Black Egg probably wore off, allowing the Hollow Knight to escape its prison. In other words, the Embrace the Void ending is a goddamn
Yeah, it's like they thought?
cliffhanger, and we have no idea how Team Cherry plans to follow this up. The Hollow Knight is running loose in Hallownest, and the Knight has transformed into a raging void monster that might try to destroy the entire kingdom.
Hollow Knight
Or at
would
least
cook
what's
Hornet
left of
without the infection.
What's
Yeah,
even more
I
strange
think
about
so.
this ending is that
Love
the announced
Hornet,
sequel,
but
Hollow Knight Silk Song doesn't seem to be related to this ending at all. But that's a whole different shit show. Obviously,
yeah, I'm
the
confused
biggest
about the
mystery
start of
surrounding
Silk
this ending
Song.
is the appearance of Bill. Did this creature exist in the void already, or was it somehow willed into existence by the power of the Godseekers? Did the Knight turn into this thing, or did it just
That goes so fucking hard. He literally rips apart Absolute Radiance just doing that. Like, that's fucking crazy.
become a part of it?
Damn.
Examining a statue of this creature,
Probably a
and other forms
prequel?
of the Knight,
Yeah, maybe.
granted the player a Hunter's Journal entry for an ancient artifact called the Void Idol, which might imply this creature might have been worshipped by the ancient civilization. There is one thing we know about this monster though. It's weak to flowers. As it turns
What?
out, those delicate flowers that Zamir has stockpiled up her ass are actually useful for something. They contain a strange power that even deters the White Lady from touching one. The Godseeker, however, is dumb enough to accept a flower from the Knight. If the player does this, instead of Void being released out into the world, this flower pulls a no you, and the Godseeker and Void disappear into thin air.
Oh.
The flower itself is described as giving off a pale light, which appears to connect it to the pale beings. Like I said before, pale beings appear to be some form of top-tier gods. As of right now, we are only aware of two, the Pale King and the White Lady, but the fact that Zamir brought these pale flowers from a faraway land implies that there are definitely more of them out there. Another small hint of the existence of pale beings are the pale ore items that can be found all over Hallownest. In general, the
my
God
gosh.
Messengers appear to be doing a lot of setup for future Hollow Knight content. Like I said before, Hollow Knight Silksong doesn't seem to connect to these events on the surface, so we are in a bit of a bind when trying
I know,
to
gives
discuss what
Godseeker
these
flower,
endings actually
Godseeker
mean
fucking
for the grand
dies.
narrative Team Cherry is building. It almost feels like we are looking through a keyhole, trying to grasp onto the totality of Team Cherry's creation. How powerful are creatures like Bill and the worms? Where
That's
did
so
things
crazy,
like the
just-
Void even come from to begin with? How much bigger is the world beyond Hallownest?
I know,
Is
how's the
Garden
statue
the butt
flying?
stuff? But of course, that's the appeal of a game like Hollow Knight. Having all of the answers to every question would just ruin the mystery of the world. Plus, if we didn't have questions like this to waste our time on, then what else would we be doing with our lives? Go outside?
Ugh.
And
You
so this
touch
video comes
grass?
to an end. Now I know
What?
the average attention span of a YouTube video
Ew.
is 9 minutes, so let me leave you with a few takeaways. 1. Hollow Knight is a game about bugs. I know this may come as a shock, but it's true.
What?
Watch the video again.
No
and this
way!
time, pay attention.
About
You'll
bugs?
notice right away, I promise.
I thought it was about
2.
people, man.
Murdering your
Crazy.
own babies might not be such a good idea after all. I mean, this is obviously just my interpretation of the game's lore. Other people might have different views on the subject of murdering babies, and every opinion is valid, so I don't want to step on anyone's toes or anything. 3. Menderbug is fucking dead. 4.
Man,
Nothing is certain.
I miss
This video
him.
probably has a few flaws in it. Trying to construct a cohesive narrative with the information found in Hollow Knight isn't exactly straightforward. I'm sure my views will change in the future, and I encourage you to explore the lore yourself. 5. And this last point is fairly obvious, but I should mention it anyway. Cory in the House is the best anime.
Oh my god, huge thanks to mossbag for the video. He posted in chat. I'll spam it a little bit. There you go. Go like it up. Give a sub. Why not? 10 million views deserved.